Hello and welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Bill Freilich, your host from WTCM Radio News, and it's our weekly roundup of the stories that are making headlines across northern Michigan with the journalists that are covering those stories. And this week we've got a brand new journalist at the table. Well, new for us, not a brand new journalist, but Linda Steffen from Interlochen Public Radio. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming in. It's good to see you. And normally when we have an IPR guest, it's Peter Payette, but he is off on sabbatical, and we're honored to have you with us. You've got a lot of fun stuff to talk about, but first let's kind of get into your background a little bit.
Okay.
Tell us how long you've been at IPR.
I have been there 8 years now.
8 years. Has it gone by fast?
Yes, it has.
Well,
definitely.
Tell us, where you're from, what led you to Interlochen, and maybe stops along the way.
Okay, well, I'm a graduate of Traverse City Central, so I'm a hometown kid, and I was a shy child, so I had no intention of being a journalist or going into broadcasting as a kid, but eventually just sort of fell into it. Had my first radio internship at IPR and loved it, fell in love with radio, so ended up reporting briefly at the state capitol and for WKAR before a position opened here, and I finished my master's degree and slid right into it in May 2005.
So this has been a homecoming for you then?
Definitely.
Nice. Tell me about maybe just your average day at IPR. I mean, like all of us, kind of depends on what gets thrown at us any given day. But
exactly. I mean, that's why we love the job,
right?
Because we don't know what's going to happen. But I have a few tasks that need to get done each day. I host All Things Considered, which is our evening drive time program. So I'm in the studio from about 4 o'clock on in the afternoon. I also am our web editor, so I'm posting content to the web and, in Peter's absence, editing the rest of the station as well and setting up the newscasts. But then in the rest of my time, in my spare time, I do what I consider kind of my primary role, which is to go out in the field with my recorder and get stories. A lot of people ask me about that. I think it's somehow easier to understand how a television reporter or a newspaper reporter gets a story for a lot of people, but I'm kind of like the newspaper reporter, but without the pen and paper. I just am walking around with my microphone.
It's what do you find when you encounter people and want to do an interview, want to approach them? How easy is it to get people to talk, and then when you pull out the tape recorder, how does that atmosphere change?
It's I would say it's more of a struggle, honestly, on the phone sometimes for people than in person. The microphone, if you watch yourself and you don't make it the focus of the moment, it seems to be kind of a natural thing. And I genuinely love people. I'm really natural with people, so I'm not a very intimidating personality, and I think that makes it easier.
Yeah. What do you like most about the day-to-day operation? Is there one thing that you just love to do each and every day?
I think I really love to tell stories. I like to tell other people's stories. I think I'm the perfect journalist in the sense that I rarely feel the need to have my opinion count in something, but I really want to understand the issues and understand where people are coming from and to tell their stories in thoughtful and meaningful ways. So I love to get out in the field and get tape, and I love the writing process, and I love the editing process and watching a story take shape. I have an edit at 10 o'clock today, so we'll see how that goes.
That's cool. What I think IPR lends itself to doing some of those great types of stories and getting the time to tell those stories too. That's one of the great things I think about Interlochen Public Radio.
Thanks. Yeah, I think there's such a good culture in the station right now where we're really thinking about, we can't. No news organization can do everything, and we truly are a very, very small staff. So how do we use our person power? And we really take a step back and say we may not be able to cover all the breaking news. We can't fulfill the niche of the television stations. We can't fulfill the niche of the newspaper. What's our role? And so we hope to at least really take a step back and be able to take some time and dive into issues, and sometimes that means that the stories don't get on in the same timeline as they get on with other outlets, but maybe they have a different kind of context and offer something different to the community.
Well, you opened the door for the perfect segue, and let's dive into the story that Peter worked on this past week.
Very nice.
And it's one that TV, radio, newspaper, we all covered. The story of the Griffin up in the Upper Peninsula, the search for the ship that sank in 1679. Peter is supposed to be on sabbatical. Did he come back to Michigan just for this?
He did. He's with his family out in San Francisco, and he was so excited about this story. He hopped on a plane, went up to the UP where all of that staging was happening, and embedded for about a week.
So tell us what you got out of Peter in terms of a story and a non-story. I mean, we were all kind of hoping that this would be the big find, that they were going to uncover whatever evidence they wanted to uncover to prove above and beyond that this was the Griffin. And
yeah, the sad ending to it is that that's not what happened, at least not yet. But I think what we got from Peter is that everybody maintained a lot of excitement through the whole thing up in the UP, and they brought in this huge crowd of people. It was a major mission, really. And they had, basically, he described it as kind of like an army mess, how they were feeding people and moving people through on the Garden Peninsula, and really handling this huge team. And the explorers remained pretty optimistic up until the point when he left. And the archaeologist who came over from France, the lead archaeologist, he brought a team. He was very excited about the beam of wood that they had found, the piece that they've been looking at for so many years that was sticking up out of the water. And his indication was that it was really consistent with wood centuries old, that it could be a bowsprit, and that would be attached to a hull. But when they dug down, there was no hull, there was no ship. They went all the way down to bedrock and didn't find anything. So that was a big disappointment. And then the state archaeologist in Lansing came in with kind of the disappointing, hey, wait a minute, we don't even know if this is a cultural artifact. We don't even know if humans made this thing. We haven't figured that out yet, and there's no hull. And the reason why they were looking in that site is because there were some kind of acoustic surveys that showed what appeared to be the outline of a ship, and we now know that wasn't the case. So it'll be interesting to see how explorers go in and go back to that and decide if they're going to keep going based on that piece of wood and look in that general area, or how they'll handle that going forward. But I think it must have been a big disappointment for those explorers who've been looking for that ship for about 30 years. They're getting pretty old even to dive, is my understanding. So.
Well, it's like the search for Jimmy Hoffa. There's always going to be something. Maybe it's here. Maybe
we've come up empty all around.
Oh, that's and it is heartbreaking. You know, I was out on vacation last week out west, and my family, reading the paper in the morning. Hey, have you heard about the Griffin? Yeah, I've heard about the Griffin. I mean, it's making news all over the country.
Really.
So.
And Peter did. One of the cool things about public radio and the system, the way it works is that member stations feed news into the national network, and Peter did file that story coast to coast.
That's neat. Well, I want to talk about the big event going on at Interlochen Public Radio. That's the 50th anniversary, which you're celebrating now and throughout much of July. But let's get into that by talking about another current story, the Bayfront Improvement Plan. The dedication ceremony was this week, and they've now, I'd say opened the gates, but there are no gates to open, but they've cut the ribbon, and people are welcome to the new redesigned Bayfront down in Traverse City.
And I don't know about you, but I wasn't expecting, and I didn't go. I sent another reporter down there, but I just loved the pictures that came back with all the kids that immediately started playing. I think before the ceremony even started, they were out there splashing around in that new play area, and that was great. I guess I wasn't sure whether the fountains would be turned on that day, and so it just ended up being a really big, excuse the pun, but a big splash. It just felt so exciting after so many years of community input to see this go on, and then immediately to see the kids playing around in it. So that's been fun this week.
And I was kind of wondering the same thing, and I was maybe half expecting them to they cut the ribbon and flip the switch and turn on the fountain simultaneously, or and maybe it's just the natural skeptic of a journalist. I was thinking, all right, how many of these kids are employees' kids and
Right.
city workers' kids, and just who did they truck in from wherever to enjoy it? But yeah, they were already out there splashing and having fun.
And it sure sounded like the mayor was surprised, because he made a comment in his speech about how he was, how he thought, evidently must have been some naysayers who said kids wouldn't be using the splash play area, but he said, hey, look around, they're already out here. So
Yeah.
I hope he didn't plant them in that case.
Yeah, and there were people who said, well, we're 100 yards from the beach, why do we need the play area? But at least on day one, it was getting some good use.
And it was a good day for it. It was cold
Oh, yeah.
water and hot temperatures.
All falls into place nicely.
Yeah, it worked out well for them, I'm sure.
This is it's part of the big picture in terms of Traverse City and growth and development. There's a lot of talk about what it will mean to the downtown area. One of the first things I noticed is they've got a sign over the pedestrian tunnel now coming
Isn't it
from
beautiful?
downtown, and it literally
As a
stopped
journalist, am I allowed to say that? It's really beautiful.
Well, it literally stopped me in my tracks, because I've walked down there for years, and I headed toward the tunnel, and I just stopped and I said, wait, what's that? I mean, there's a sign over the tunnel, you go under, and it's just completely different now, and it's wide open. And the city planner Russ Sawyering said to me, I think it really connects downtown to the Bayfront. Now you can turn around and you can see downtown. The fence isn't there, the zoo buildings aren't there. A big part of Traverse City's past thing linking to the future, right?
Right, and hopefully, there have been some concerns, I think, for some folks about the safety of that tunnel in recent years particularly, and a couple of incidents. So hopefully that'll make people feel more secure.
Well, I want to talk about other big events of Traverse City's past, present, and future in terms of your 50th anniversary series. So let's do that after we take a break. We're going to come back in just a moment here on The Briefing Room.
What is Up North TV?
It's TV that you do.
You pick the topic.
You write the script. You run the camera.
You edit the video.
It's your vision.
Your perspective.
Your story.
Commercial free.
Free speech.
What is Up North TV?
It's me.
It's you.
It's all of us.
View us on Analog 97.
Cable digital too.
Digital 992.
UpNorthMedia.org.
Welcome back to The Briefing Room. I'm Bill Freilich from WTCM Radio News, your host, and this week we are joined by Linda Stefan from Interlochen Public Radio. Radio teaming up just to get along for a half hour. It's great stuff, isn't it? Tell us about the big series that IPR is going through right now. It's a 50th anniversary special. Tell us how this came to be.
Well, yeah, we were thinking back about how we were going to celebrate our 50th anniversary, and as a news team, we thought, well, it'd be best to really focus on what we do best, which is telling stories. And we thought, how has the region changed in the time since that tower went up in 1963? And so we came up with this idea for 50 years of big ideas, and what were some of the things that we really thought shaped the region. And this is not a comprehensive list, and it's not even maybe we didn't rank order or put them at the top. I mean, some of the choices were based on what we thought would be a good radio story and what we had the voices for, but I think we came up with a really cool list, and it's exciting to think over the course of 50 years that really some key aspects of what we define as up north today simply didn't exist back then, and so it's amazing where we've come.
Well, we just talked a minute ago about the Bayfront. Tell us where that maybe ranks. Is that part of the list?
You know what? It tells a story within it. The Bayfront, there's a lot of public and private funds that went into that Bayfront project, but the Bayfront itself, including the land acquisitions to buy it and different development projects along that over the years, money has come from something called the Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund. And that trust fund has paid for a variety of things, including downtown bike and recreation trails, other recreation trails throughout the region, and Clay Cliffs Conservancy lands. Clay Cliffs was an example. It's adjacent to the Sleeping Bear Dunes, bought just a couple of years ago by the Leelanau Conservancy. I looked up the dollar amount. The Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund contributed $2.9 million for buying that piece of property that went into conservation. The Acme Shoreline Project, the hopes of having that contiguous stretch of parkland in Acme Township similar to Traverse City, also being supported by this trust fund. It was the first of its kind in the nation, and it was established out of controversy in the 1980s over drilling in the Pigeon River Country State Forest for oil and gas. So now royalties that the state earns off of oil and gas drilling on state land goes into this pool of funds that then pays for recreation opportunities, land conservation, and all of that. And so you really can look out over the landscape of northern Michigan and see how that fund has transformed our region. So that was one of the choices of what we highlighted
You mentioned,
in the series.
Yeah, you mentioned Sleeping Bear Dunes as well. That's part of the past 50 years as well, the National Lakeshore.
It is. The National Lakeshore, I believe Congress in 1970 acted to create that as a National Lakeshore Park. And before that, of course, it was under private ownership. And that was a really divisive decision too. And you look at that today and you think it's just this pristine shoreline and such a pride of the region, and it draws so many tourists. That was a really controversial thing to do at the time. And if you really, it displaced a lot of people. People were upset. And there was also, that was just the beginning of the idea that the government would have any sort of role in protecting the environment. And so people really questioned whether the government was the right entity or the entity that would best protect the environment. And so there were some trust issues there. But in digging up that story, my colleague Bob Allen reported that story, and just as a listener, the thing that stuck out for me is that since I have been a child, I have been going swimming at North Bar Lake, and it's a really popular swimming hole that was plotted for development before the Congress stepped in, and that lake probably would have been entirely under private ownership and not available to the public at all.
What do you have a favorite story from the collection? I don't know how many total topics that you covered, but is there anything that sticks out to you that you hope people get a chance to hear?
I can't say I have a favorite, but I'll tell one of the story that I focused on because I guess I spent more time on that, so that pops out to me as a favorite. But some of our most iconic vistas, again, in northern Michigan are our vineyard land. So many beautiful, beautiful landscapes of vineyard land in Old Mission and Leelanau peninsulas. The peninsula and the Leelanau County, they're both running out of vineyard land at this point. And it's hard to believe that 50 years ago, there was not a single vineyard or winery in the region.
That is hard to believe. Let's talk, we just have a couple minutes left here. Let's talk about another story that you mentioned to me during the break, the State Theater. That's obviously has historical significance as a theater and a property. As we know it today, it's obviously a lot different, but it's got a role in downtown. Yeah, and
we reported on that. That's our nod to the arts in this series. We did touch base on the State Theater and the creation of the year-round theater and the film festival that came in 2005. And it's such a new idea that we weren't sure if this really fits into the series, but in the end we decided it absolutely did. That festival, the film festival, is now talked about on par with the National Cherry Festival oftentimes. And the Cherry Festival has been built over more than a century. So if you think about the long-standing tradition of that, and then how quickly the film festival popped in, and just the lighting of that marquee in downtown and what it did for so many of our psyches, and especially in the winter time, to see the vitality of downtown, and that really has become a symbol of that. We thought was pretty special, and we had we had to throw that one in there.
It's hard to believe we're at Cherry Festival time already, and that means Film Festival is right around the corner again this year as well. Linda, one thing that I don't think got on your list, but we talked about as well, is the role of the media in northern Michigan, and this is the perfect platform, I guess, for us to at least discuss it. Interlochen Public Radio celebrating 50 years, but between television, newspaper, and other radio stations as well, northern Michigan may be a different place without some of those pioneers 50 to 80 years ago.
I don't know what you hear from listeners and viewers, but what we get feedback on from people at IPR is that the world is so much richer, and that this is really can be an isolated place if you don't have a place where you go to get information and to find out what's happening around the state and the rest of the country and internationally. And so there is something about having all of that at your fingertips in such a remote area particularly. And so to think that 50 years ago we could turn on the airwaves and be able to connect with each other, and then also to the broader community, and in so many media forms, not just IPR, but TCM has an even longer tradition in northern Michigan, and also the television stations. It's a pretty powerful and transformative way to live in northern Michigan. Of course, our series is launched based on the idea that IPR brought in the tower, and our first story in the series is about IPR, but I have to leave that to our listeners and viewers as to whether or not they think it belongs. I'm not objective enough to...
Well, that's good of you to say, but it is, I mean, it's almost hard for any of us, and maybe it's a generational thing, but to imagine not only northern Michigan, but any place without newspaper or radio, television access. But to think of those pioneers 50 years ago who said, you know what, we need to do this, we need to start this, and not only to get it started, but then to continue it for generations.
And Joseph Maddie, who founded the National Music Camp at the time, now Interlochen Arts Camp, and then Interlochen Arts Academy, and finally Interlochen Public Radio, he loved radio, and he loved the idea. He was a classical music guy, and so he was really excited about bringing classical music and strong culture and connections in that way into the local community in northern Michigan, something that just really wasn't available. And when you think about all of the cultural institutions that are here today and built up, and again, people talk about coming here and being excited about the culture and the arts that exist here, despite the fact that it's a small rural area. It's pretty exciting.
Well, let's leave folks with the latest technological ways that they can get access to some of IPR's programming. Obviously, you can listen on the radio as well, but if you're out of that listening area, you can still read about and I presume listen to some of those great stories online too.
That's right, iprnews.org, and we'll be adding those stories and many others through the course of July.
Fabulous. Linda Steffen, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I want to thank everyone for tuning into the Briefing Room this week. I'm Bill Freilich. You can check out our blog at briefingroom.org, and feel free to send us some ideas of topics or guests you'd like to see on the show as well. We'll see you next week here on the Briefing Room.